Well, everyone, it's time for us to go ahead and take a look at the iPad 10th generation that just came out and compare it against the iPad 9th generation. Now, this is going to be very interesting because normally when Apple makes a new iPad, at least in the same lineup, they will go ahead and remove the older one. But this is the first time I can possibly think of where Apple is currently still selling the iPad 9 and the iPad 10 simultaneously on their Apple Store. So this means you can go inside the Apple Store and pick both these iPads up, or you can go inside apple.com and pretty much buy them from there. So if you want to buy these iPads, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there on Amazon and help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off on the outside of both of these, there are clearly some differences. But in my opinion, one of the biggest difference is with the price tag. The iPad 9 started off at $329, which I think was pretty fair. I don't think that was like an outrageous price, and with the student discount, it was, less than $300. But the iPad 10 now has taken a completely different approach, where now it's at $449. So that is a pretty big jump up. And on top of that, the cellular model of that in price difference is more than the cellular model of the iPad 9. So I don't know why they increased that as well. So that's very, very weird. But you are pretty much getting a more expensive iPad on the iPad 10. So definitely keep that in mind. You are also getting more colors though on the iPad 10th generation, so you have a few more colors you can choose from, but that price increase is honestly very, very interesting in my opinion. Now, with the outside of the panels, the iPad 9th generation had a 10.2-inch Retina display. Now, that display had True Tone, and I think it was a pretty good display at the end of the day. Like, it wasn't that bad. Of course, with the current iPad 10, it's better, but the iPad 9, in my opinion, it was a pretty big jump up, at least from the iPad 6 and the 7. So I was still kind of happy with that design, but you were getting that home button and pretty thick bezels. So definitely not the latest design in my opinion. On the iPad 10 though, you are getting a better display. It's 10.9 inches, a liquid retina display that still maintains True Tone. The biggest things here though is that it is, removing the home button. So you are now actually just getting a full-fledged, it still is a lot of bezel, but compared to, the iPad 9, it is a reduced amount of bezel. So I'm a big fan of it. I think design-wise it looks great. I didn't really care too much about the home button, but you still have Touch ID on the iPad 10. So no Face ID. The FaceTime camera though is also landscape, which I actually prefer. The iPad 9 is still, top, so keep that in mind. But regardless, I will say the iPad 10th generation still looks better. Now, another big thing is two things. One, the iPad 10 has removed the headphone jack, so there's no headphone jack on the iPad 10, but it's also brought in USB-C, which I think is awesome. I love USB-C, and I think it is one of the best things that they kind of did with this lineup, but the Apple Pencil support is still Apple Pencil 1. I don't think Apple will pretty much bring Apple Pencil 2 support to this one because I don't even think it has the hardware to do so. So you have to get an adapter to use it on the iPad 10. I'm sure you've already heard about it, but if you're not aware of it, you will have to get a dongle. So keep that in mind. It's like another $9. It's so annoying. I don't know why they did this. It's one of those things that you're just going to have to kind of get used to, I guess, with Apple currently. With the iPad 9 though, you can plug in your Apple Pencil straight to the bottom of that lightning port and you can still use it there, which I think is really cool, and I'm really happy they went that approach. Now on the back, there's really not anything crazy. We do have the flat sides on the iPad 10, which I like a lot. The iPad 9 had kind of like the curved, side to it, I guess. Now we have Apple logos on the back. We have single camera setups on the top, left, and that kind of covers it up on the outside. There's tons of internal changes, which we're going to get into in a second. But if on the outside, if I had to rate it, definitely the iPad 10 looks far better, and I'm really happy they went that approach. But I still think with the iPad 9, it still looks okay. And if you're currently using it, it's definitely a really good iPad. And internally, there's some changes, but I would say the biggest change is probably going to be on the outside, to be honest. In fact, actually, I take that back. I think probably one of the biggest changes is with the cameras. So on the iPad 9th generation, we had an 8-megapixel wide-angle camera on the back. With now on the iPad 10, we have a 12-megapixel wide-angle camera. So that in and of itself is a pretty big change. But now we also got this landscape front-facing camera on the iPad 10. Now both of them are ultra-wide cameras on the front too, which is really cool. So things like that, center stage feature are going to be able to be used on both, which I think is really cool. So I will say the iPad 10 is definitely going to be giving you a way better camera experience. And that is something that I actually do like a lot about that specific, camera. You can go and utilize pretty much almost the same type of features between both. As far as I know and as far as I can tell from Apple's spec sheet, you can film in more resolutions. You can do 4K at 60 on the iPad 10, where you can only do 1080p up to 30 on the iPad 9. So that might be something to keep in mind on the back camera. Although on the front camera, it looks like you can still do 1080p on the front of both of them. No 4K on the front of either of these iPads, so keep that in mind. But I will still say on the back camera, you are getting a far better camera on the iPad 10 than on the iPad 9. So if that's something that's important to you, if you're filming a lot on your iPad, if you're taking a lot of photos, if you're going in that direction, you're going to be getting higher megapixel count on the iPad 10. The front cameras are going to be identically the same on both those, so there's not that big of a difference there besides it being in landscape mode. But I will tell you, if you're doing a lot of photography on your iPad 10 or on your iPad, the 10 might be the better way to go. But I'll still be honest, I think the iPad 9's camera is still pretty decent, and not too many people are using their iPad camera too often when they have like an iPhone or Android, so I think it's totally okay in this specific situation as well. Now moving on to the internals, actually before we get there, the longevity of both these iPads, I mean, which one is going to last longer? Well, theoretically speaking, the best way to think about it is that the iPad 9 has pretty much the same chipset as the iPhone 11, where the iPad 10 has the same chipset as the iPhone 12. So realistically speaking, how long is the iPhone 11 or 12 going to last? Well, they're going to be lasting probably within a year of each other. So that's kind of the way to think about these iPads. But Apple has also switched things around, and they've made lots of iPads to last way longer than they should. So I'm not really worried about the iPad 9 lasting way less time than iPad 10. So they're going to be lasting around the same time. Really, the only thing is Apple kind of like ruining and kind of like removing features of the iPad 9 on iPadOS that the iPad 10 is going to support. Otherwise, though, I think both of them are going to be very, very good and, supported for a long period of time. Now, in terms of the longevity, in terms of the performance between them, the iPad 9 is going to have the same performance as the iPhone 11 with the Apple A13 Bionic chip inside. The iPad 10 is going to have the iPhone 12 chipset, the A14 Bionic. So, in my opinion, I don't really think there's going to be that big of a difference from the iPhone 11 to the 12. And in this case, the iPad 9 to the iPad 10. I've done a lot of performance and a lot of gaming on the iPad 9. I've done a little bit of gaming so far on the iPad 10. And so far, I haven't been able to tell big, massive differences between either one. And I've used the A13, I've used the A14 for years now. And again, I haven't really noticed big, massive differences. The big thing I can tell you, though, is that having the newer chipset is always going to be better, and it's going to just give you better performance in the long run, and it's going to be giving you a better experience overall. That's what you're paying for, theoretically. So honestly, you're going to be getting that better, you're going to be getting a better experience on the iPad 10, overall. But how much better is it? Well, if you're a student and you're taking notes and you're just kind of, highlighting things with the Apple Pencil, and you're going through and you're just kind of doing basic things, not anything crazy, just you need a portable device and you don't want to buy a MacBook, well, the iPad 9 is still perfectly fine. If I really wanted to, I could probably do everything I ever needed to do in my life on an iPad 9. The iPad 10 is a little bit nicer though, because for one, it's a bigger display. So if you're, carrying around that, specific iPad, you have a little bit of a bigger display to work with. You have still Apple Pencil 1 support, and you have to buy a dongle and everything, but you can, as far as I know, use the Apple Pencil while you're charging it now. So that's kind of nice if you're into it, but it's not really going to be a big deal for most people. And the only reason I would even go and upgrade to the iPad 10 is if you really wanted to go ahead and, do better video editing or photo editing or, play higher intensive games. But in my experience, the iPad 9 is still going to be very good. It's not like you're going from an Intel chipset to the M1 chipset. It's not like that at all. And the performance is probably one of the smaller things between these two. I would probably rate the, body difference and the new design as number 1. I'd rate the camera probably number 2, and then maybe performance at number 3, but even that's not that big of a deal in my opinion. So you're definitely getting a faster iPad on the iPad 10, but I still think the iPad 9 is still very, very fast as well. So that kind of covers it out there. And to be completely honest, to kind of sum up this whole entire comparison, I think if you currently own an iPad 9, I would just recommend keeping it. But on top of that, if you're not owning either one of these iPads and you're planning on getting one, is the design a big turnoff for you? Do you think the iPad 9 looks old? If that's the case, then I would just go for the iPad 10. But even then, you can probably buy some older iPads, as far as I know, the iPad Air 4 and some other iPads in that, facility. I mean, you may just want to go get those for cheaper than the iPad 10 or around the same price. And that might be giving you better experience. But I still think the iPad 9 is still very, very decent for the price tag. I think the iPad 10 is, definitely the better iPad. But I just think the, increase in price kind of turns me off. And that's kind of how I look at it. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comments section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.